So I'm Iberian Viros. This is my channel. You probably already subbed to me if you're seeing this, but there's a chance you're not. I'm a little sick right now, so if I seem kind of out of it, that's why. And basically, this we're gonna do a podcast here. This is the first ever PodCastizo. Just a good name. And we're gonna do it on questions on consciousness. The very essence of consciousness. Different questions pertaining to it. And I'm here with Dubby Dubs. Say hi.
Oh, hello.
Babylonian Hebrew. Okay, well, whatever. His internet's always fucked, and he's muted. So maybe now he's unmuted. I don't know. But and active monad.
Yeah, hello.
All right. So, does anyone want to start off with a statement or anything?
Yeah, I feel like I should, since I've actually studied a program called Consciousness Studies with philosophy and cognitive neuroscience. I don't want to I would like you more to have the conversation, but if I can just
Yeah, go ahead.
when I know something that knows know a problem with a certain theory or something, I'd like to chip in with that.
All right.
So
well, I guess how we should start this discussion is all right. So how I think we should start the discussion is let's just ask everyone what they think consciousness is. And I'll start with all the guests, and then I'll just say what my idea is. So, Debbie, what do you think consciousness is?
Well, I guess you could say fundamentally, consciousness is something that separates us from any kind of like material object, like rocks or mountains or even maybe plants, which aren't material, because in that like they all have these physical properties, but they don't have any kind of like inner being or kind of inner like I or inner subjectivity or experiences. So you'd say like consciousness is inner experience, inner subjectivity, and it's probably the most understanding consciousness is probably one of the most important questions there are because consciousness is really what makes us human, what gives us the capacity to feel and to think and to problem solve and to um, um, discover new things and to work towards our goals and have families. And but for thousands of years, most people have been very perplexed by consciousness. Like there has been like a very there's been like a philosophical question since like antiquity whether consciousness is kind of part of the brain or whether consciousness is separate from the brain, which Descartes I think called dualism, and I think maybe that's where we could start.
All right, interesting. Yeah, and I would say, yeah, I wouldn't say since antiquity, but yeah, this has always been an issue. Like, what is,
more since the Renaissance.
yeah, more, that's what I was thinking. But actually, which, Monad, what do you think consciousness
I think you can't like define consciousness in terms of something else. Consciousness is consciousness. You can kind of point to what you're talking about, as Dabby did with like saying that a conscious being is a being that you can say there's something to be like that being. Like you can't be a stone. You can probably be a dog because a dog is conscious. So, but yeah, consciousness is a subject, like, yeah, the experience. You have the inner experience, and also I think the other side of the coin is agency, free will. So
But I mean that's more of a controversial position to say that consciousness is free will. That's not like it's pretty much established that consciousness is like inner subjective experience, but it's
yeah,
not
okay,
like
it possesses agency. That's I don't have to stretch to all the way to free will, but
I see what you're
if,
saying.
yeah.
What's it called? Babylonian Hebrew. What do you think consciousness is? Or how would you define it? All right. Well, I think he's lagging. Or your mic is on mute, your mic is on mute, just so you know. So I don't know if that might be why you're not talking. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, he's not saying anything. So my view of it is essentially, I guess I disagree with you guys. Intersubjective experience. I think that's a basic way of describing what consciousness is. But now that we've gone over that, let's talk about uh, the different ideas of the what manifests consciousness or what creates it, and what it is more in practice. So, for example, Debbie Dubs was talking about mind body dualism, I believe. And many people, I assume many people, especially those of more spiritual persuasion, would probably be more into the idea of a mind-body duality, while a more materialist person would probably be more focused on maybe a kind of
Physically.
physicalism, a kind of that the mind is the consciousness.
Or the brain is the mind, which is the consciousness. That there's no like separate thing there. It's just the brain. And
Well,
I think obviously a good place to start would be with Descartes and his idea of like the homunculi that you had, that like the body itself was very mechanical. It was kind of it was just like a machine, and like you kind of open up a machine, you could open up the body, and you can see clear similarities in how they worked. But Descartes thought the brain was totally different than the rest of the mechanical body. The
no,
brain
no, he
or the mind.
didn't really. Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. The consciousness was.
Yeah, the mind was not the brain. The brain was part of the mechanical, but the mind wasn't mechanical. It was something else altogether. And he had something that he called the homunculus. And you want to explain that, Monad?
Yeah, I'm not sure that Descartes used this as an explanation, though. I it's he kind of thought that he defined matter in one way, which is extended in space and separated in space, and there's it's hard to see how you can describe a conscious experience in those kinds of terms, using those categories. And he just appealed to God as a mediator between these kind of two substances that didn't seem to meet. So, even though he said that they did so in the pineal gland, which was kind of just a random place.
And the pineal gland, sorry, that's in basically the center, sort of the central region of the brain for anyone who doesn't know, and it can get calcified.
Yes, it can get calcified. So what were we talking about? The homunculi?
Like I think the idea of that is that it's like you could imagine like I guess it's like a little person inside your brain that reads all the information, and it's kind of and that would be kind of like the mind, I think.
Like a command center, or
Like a command center, or like the mind that's taking all the inputs and is reading and making the decisions, and and there's a kind of paradox there, because who is controlling the homunculus? Wouldn't there have to be another homunculus within the homunculus, another one within that, and you get this kind of problem of infinite regress, and that's why a lot of thinkers just think there is no like greater mind there. It's just a brain, it's just a physical matter, and that's it.
Yeah, can I mention that eliminativist view that I mentioned for you earlier when we talked about it? Like Patricia Churchland, she doesn't believe that consciousness exists at all. It's a totally meaningless folk psychology way of explaining.
But what is it? Yeah,
really. No. I want to make a point, because me and Monad were talking about this before. There's two things. Naturally, I'm moved in the direction of thinking that I'm compelled to think that people like that are like either philosophical zombies, but more realistically, I think like people who say things like that it's this kind of like scientism.
Yeah,
No.
I called it intellectual autism.
Yeah,
No, I think
where
it totally denies your inner experience
Yeah,
exactly.
in favor of
like
these weird theories and super, and it's basically following a formula, like, oh, this reduces to this reduces to this, with
no, not
absolute
even reduces.
Look,
That's reductionism. Eliminativism isn't.
artistic regard to any kind of inner subjective experience that you have that points otherwise from this kind of very deterministic, materialistic understanding of the brain.
that's the thing. It's just like, all right, and this is what I hate bringing this up, but when we were talking about how if the way you get to something, like if your moral compass leads you to quote like something like, I don't know, let's say antinatalism. If your moral code leads you to that, or your values lead you to that, your values are broken because it just goes against the very essence of being. And
Well, right. I think that's a good point. Like, I'll just to elaborate on that. There's something in logic called a sound argument and a valid argument. A valid argument just means if you have like two premises, you have premises. It just means that the argument following from the premises works. Like, if the premise is that all humans can fly, you could say that Iberian can fly, and that's a valid argument. It's logically entailed from the premise. But if an argument is sound, that means that both the premises, it means that both the argument itself has to be true and the premises have to work. So if the premises are false, then the argument can be valid but not sound. And I think what you could have there. If you have a very materialistic worldview, you could make an argument that consciousness doesn't exist.
exactly, that's what I was going to say.
That's a valid argument, but it's not a sound argument.
No,
if you are into
good.
scientism, if you're into scientism so much that you have to say, you have to be able to test and find evidence before you can, say that something exists, or you can have probable belief that something exists, and you're in your consciousness while you're saying that. Like, if your beliefs don't lead you to thinking that consciousness doesn't exist, if your systematic way, your system of deducing things doesn't lead you leads you to believe that consciousness doesn't exist, you're fucking, I don't want to swear, but your bleeping system is wrong. Like, it's wrong if you can't do that.
If you create a system where there's no place for consciousness and you choose to deny consciousness, then there's like, what are you doing? Like, but also what Patricia Schertland described the category of conscious experiences as the same as things that go bump in the dark.
It's just like so.
Not even reduction.
Like I said, I'm sometimes partial to think people like that are just philosophical zombies, and they just literally don't understand that consciousness is like a thing.
Well, before I want to explain what philosophical zombie is before you just invoke.
So philosophical zombie is basically someone who acts like a normal person in every way, and outwardly there would be no way for you to know that they weren't, but they're not conscious. They don't actually perceive anything. So you slap them, they say, "Ow, what the hell, man? Why'd you hit me?"
But there's no inner
subjective. There's nothing actually going on inside of their heads. They're just saying, like, it's just like a machine is doing that.
Well, it's just a reaction.
Yeah. So with that, people, like, the only way, like, I don't think that's actually the case, but it makes you kind of wonder, like, are these people like literal, like, philosophical zombies? These people have no consciousness, and that's why they say things like this. Like, they actually just think it's like a myth or something, and only when you actually like get deep into it, this comes out, which would not really make them exactly like an actual philosophical zombie, because an actual philosophical zombie would pretend to have consciousness, but it wouldn't like be faking it or something. It just wouldn't know that it's not conscious. But in this case, it might be like when you really start asking.
I mean, obviously, these philosophers have conscious
that's what I'm saying.
experience.
They
They're just explaining it away because they're just so smart. Like it's like the whole thing. Like, oh, we used to think this was true. We used to think like the phlogiston or like the kind of way fire worked was true, but then we realized that there's actually a scientific explanation. And they go down the line, and now we used to think consciousness was true, but now we're just so smart, we're just so modern that we realized it was just an illusion.
Yeah, when we had only folk psychology, then we talked about like feelings and actual intentions and stuff like that. But
and with all of that, with this this behavior, what I was going to say is, what actually is going on is they have their set. I also think that they have their set, way of deducing things, and when that doesn't work, they just decide, oh, conscious is one of those things that goes bump in the night. It's like God and angels or something. Like that's really what that's actually what they're kind of saying. It's like,
no,
or it's like,
more like she's kind of trying to show how arbitrary category it is.
oh, even then,
It's like conscious phenomena has nothing to do with each other. A different thing that we call conscious.
Even then, though, it's just like it is literally like you get someone, you have this thing, you have a way of explaining the world, and you're like, oh, it just works. Everything fits in a place in this world.
Yeah.
And then it's like, but how do you explain this thing? And they're just like, oh, well, this thing that is literally essential to my being as a person. Like, it is everything of me. This thing that is the most important part of my subjective experience, or it is my subjective. It's not even the most important part, but it is the most important part of like.
It is your being. It is your being.
It is you, like that. Whatever. That's just whatever. Like, it doesn't matter.
You wouldn't be if you weren't conscious.
It's just so like outlandish, and like it's just a broken way of thinking, basically.
This maybe we mentioned the mind-body problem, because that's often how you approach the idea of consciousness, the physical, and like, because it's as you say, they have this model where they look through the world, like they have their conscious experiences, and they abstract things from their experience and make this world, build up this model of the world, and then they can't, like, they missed the conscious experience itself, and they can't like build that thing, like they can't take these abstractions and use as parts and build like up to consciousness, because they only make sense as abstractions of the whole. So it's a problem if you're a materialist in some ways, I think, depending how you kind of define that also.
Yeah, I would agree. I'd be inclined to agree. So let me.
Because if you have no assumptions about how the world should be, then consciousness isn't a problem.
Yeah, and also, if you start from saying that, like your first, I think the first assumption must be, I am. Like, I exist, I am real, before you start saying anything else. So, when you start, I like, you know what I mean? Like, I think, therefore I am.
It's consciousness referring to itself.
First axiom here. This should be the very first thing your ideology, your method of deducing all that should all fit in line with that first, think, therefore I am kind of thing. Where it's like, all right, like, this is all my perception. But what do you guys think about never mind, I forgot.
Yeah, can I just point there's still an interesting issue, even if you're not a materialist. I'm not, for example, but there's the kind of the world that you view, the kind of that we call the external world or model of the world, how that relates to our inner experience, how like they must come together somehow, like in the brain, and that's like an interesting thing.
Explain further.
Yeah, like even if you don't, I'm not a materialist. I don't make like the things I see, like the material world, to be more fundamental. I think consciousness is the most fundamental thing. But even then, you have you know that the things you see, like in the world, like your brain. If you watch someone's brain and what's happening in there relates to the experience of that person. So it's still an important question. But it's not a mystery in the same sense.
Yeah. Does anyone want to answer that? Maybe W or
I think one. I think that's one like attractive feature of a more like materialistic worldview, because it kind of makes sense. If you don't really deconstruct it, to just say, okay, well, consciousness comes from a certain configuration of neural states. You just assemble the neurons in such and such a way to have such and such a complex network, just because it's so complex, and you have billions of neurons firing and billions of like electrical signals occurring at the same time. That just all produces consciousness, and that's what consciousness is. That would be like the physicalist materialist view. But if you're going to say no, there's more to consciousness than the material. There's something beyond the material. There's some kind of consciousness exists above the material, beyond the material. Then how does the material get hold of consciousness? How does it kind of like take in consciousness? Like, what's the relationship between the brain and consciousness? Why do you even need? Oh, I think I'm echoing or something. But why do you even need the brain if you just have if consciousness isn't material? Why do you even need a material brain to be able to have conscious experiences? I think this whole kind of immaterial consciousness. While it opens up a lot of possibilities, it also opens up a lot of problems.
so.
That's it, really. What problems?
Like what I was saying, like how do you get hold of consciousness? How does that even like what I was saying, like you kind of like if it's not just the brain, if consciousness isn't just a brain being arranged in some configuration, then what is it? What is it like? What does it require for an entity to achieve consciousness? If it's not just that brain configuration.
Yeah, I get what
By
you're
that
saying.
logic, by the logic of the consciousness being formed merely by a certain degree of complexity within a system, hypothetically, then consciousness could be, provided there is advanced enough technology, be formed via mechanical means. However, I don't actually think such a thing is possible. Thus, I think consciousness Thus, I think that consciousness is likely more than merely a complex system. That's just my take.
Well, what I would say is, I mean, I'm partial to two ideas, basically. Like, I don't actually have a stand on this. Either the immaterial or material consciousness, and I want to go into each one of the ones. Like, I'll just talk about my two views of what it could be. The consciousness is the result of, a very complex system existing. So, and it has to be complex enough that it takes in inputs from multiple sources and has, multiple ways of dealing with them. And when all of those come together, like a network of different, senses and faculties and things like that, it all kind of melds together, and from that arises the consciousness. And then my second.
Can I just ask you one thing about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Like when in Uh, when can you say that they come together in a system that's
Well, I
totally
don't know when that would be.
mechanical and made out of parts?
I don't, because I think that there probably are actually just like different layers of consciousness. Like certain things are more conscious than others, um, and that's kind of weird to explain, but it's probably somewhat the case. When someone is drunk, for example, they seem kind of like I don't know when I'm drunk. Sometimes I feel a little less conscious almost.
Yeah,
Like and maybe it just is more, it's a more extreme version of that up until, it's kind of a gradient in. That could be the case.
you can't be like consciousness is either on or off though.
Yeah, I
Even
don't
though
think it
it
is.
can
Oh,
be.
no, that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, you can have different degrees of volume and complexity, but it's either an experience there or it isn't. Like
Oh, I
there's
see what you're saying. Yeah.
there's
Well, I don't. Like I said, I'm not. This isn't my views. This is just I'm kind of partial to this. But that's a good question to bring up. And it would be interesting to see someone kind of go into that. There may or may not be, some sort of answer to that, but I don't know it. And then the other idea that I'm partial to, though, is comes from, my kind of religious background, or whatever religion I'm into right now, which is a kind of that all things are conscious, but only things with brains, essentially. And by conscious, I mean like there's a kind of all-encompassing force that
So
needs
it's one
brain.
step away from sort of panpsychism, but it's the idea that the brain is I'm not to mischaracterize your views, but the brain is a conduit of consciousness
Yeah. No,
manifesting itself in this world, but there is sort of one pool of consciousness.
Yeah, no, yeah, that is exactly.
You sound like Darth Vader or something like that.
I feel.
What are you talking about?
Oh, you sound okay now. That's fine.
but do you see
Sorry about that.
consciousness as flowing through all material things? Is that like
I mean, kind of. It's like a pool. So like a rock isn't conscious because because it's just like consciousness is around it, but you can.
in what sense is it around it then?
Like it's in it. I don't know how to explain it. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's like there's a pool everywhere. It doesn't exist like here and now in space time, sort of, but it's everywhere. And this is all like I said, I don't expect people to believe this or anything, and I don't expect this isn't like a
Well, what is that?
sort of.
Are you saying a rock has awareness? A rock can.
But a rock has no awareness because it has no brain, because it has no way of
There's no way of channeling consciousness.
yeah, but the consciousness is like in the rock. There's no.
So like if you had I know obviously expert, but if you're saying that the brain itself isn't consciousness, it's not the configuration itself, it's consciousness, but the brain somehow channels consciousness. Like, how do you think that's done? Is consciousness just kind of floating around and the brain captures it?
Well, the brain, through its complexity, and like I said, I don't actually believe either of these. This is just what I'm partial to. The brain kind of pulls in, like not even like.
Yeah, I get what you mean. I think you make
it functions, and through that functioning, a conscious can act like the pool. Some of it can actually like be there and kind of perceive the world, perceive itself, basically, from a limited perspective, as opposed to from the broad, the full broad, like godly perspective.
I just wonder if it would be more correct to say that like consciousness isn't everywhere. It's actually outside space-time. It doesn't apply to it.
Well, but it kind of just leads to these weird questions. If consciousness is outside of space-time, and we're
no, because like you can't apply space-time to the category of consciousness. It can still be totally dependent on some process in the brain, like coexisting with some certain process. But you can't say that this configuration is the feeling, because then you can't look after like that. Then you would already know that it was that like.
What I would say is, like, for example, if you have someone, like I've had multiple friends now that I know and people I've met over the internet who have been in sensory deprivation chambers. And in those sensory deprivation chambers, they have when they're in there, they lose track of time and space, like where they are.
Yeah,
Like
an
time no longer becomes a
identity.
thing.
Yeah.
And so, for example, if you damage part of the brain, you can probably cause someone to not be able to kind of comprehend time anymore.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I think that people can't really get bored anymore, or something along those lines, and have a poor time keeping track of time if the amygdala specifically is damaged.
Yeah, so things like that. So
The amygdala.
things that
That's
Amygdala.
There's all these sub-functions in the brain that can be specifically kind of.
Well, right, I feel like each kind of like there are different parts of the brain. Some parts of the brain are involved in memory retention. If you lesion that part of the brain, suddenly, like in the hippocampus, you suddenly can't form new memories. And some
Yeah.
parts of the brain are important in fear. And if you damage the amygdala, suddenly you're kind of irresponsive to fear. And then like there are parts of the brain, like I don't know exactly what they're called, but that you damage probably like the prefrontal cortex and stuff like that, where if you damage them, it would seem that you just lose consciousness. So those parts of the brain are involved in kind of generating a conscious state.
Yeah, I'm not sure. They make a huge part of what we're able as humans to do with consciousness, but I think some animals don't have those frontal lobes, and I would think they are conscious anyway. So it's probably a deeper thing.
Yeah, I would say animals are conscious, and I would also. What I was thinking was, but this idea that I was going over is kind of a continuation of the other one, as in the other idea is that the complexity itself is what creates consciousness in a material sense. But then the other one I would say is like the complexity is what allows a consciousness to kind of take root, like come from the pool. It allows it to pull it in, basically.
Okay, I just want to down like a few of like my ideas and my kind of history with consciousness. I'll just start off with saying I come from a scientific background. I've taken very heavy science classes in university, so I tend to look at things from like a more materialistic, evidence-based perspective. So to me, it seemed like the most sensible perspective was that consciousness came from the brain because that just made sense to me. We know that if you damage the brain, you damage your ability to to have memory and to have vivid emotional experiences and to live a kind of fully conscious life. So it just seemed like that it was consciousness that emanated from the brain. So that was kind of where I started at. But one of the things, but there are a couple like weird things about that view. If you think that like consciousness just comes from the brain and it's just kind of like an effect of the brain, then it has really no causal role in your life, and that might be a little confusing to begin with, but I'll explain. Let's say like we know in our day-to-day lives that we avoid painful things. Like we don't like pain. And you could say, well, pain evolved, the kind of perception of pain evolved so that we would avoid painful stimuli. But if the painful but if the but how would that work? Because if the brain state configuration caused pain, the pain is just an emergent phenomenon. It's not going to go back and affect the brain state if the pain is above the brain state. If the pain is just a characteristic of the brain state, it can't affect the brain state. And I think, and that's and what a lot of like the materialists, physicalists will say is that consciousness has no causal role in behavior. That the consciousness is just a side effect. It's just kind of the analogy would be like a train that is really really super complex and all these complex engines going on and is just it is moving around on the track and it has steam coming out the back of the train. And now the steam isn't a necessary part of the train. It's just a side effect of the train's functioning. And what these scientists think is that these sensations of consciousness, these perceptions of consciousness, pain, joy, every other thing you can imagine, are just the side effect of the complexity. But but to me, it just seems like that eliminates like so much of what life is, and it doesn't really make sense to me. Like why would it evolve? Like why would we have all of these experiences? Like why would we have pain? Why would we have fear? Why would we be scared of things if that kind of perception of fear didn't help us survive? So I think we have to kind of not necessarily move beyond, but at least start exploring the idea that consciousness can have a causal role.
Well,
And that,
essentially, W Dubs. I just want to like clarify. So basically, what you're saying is like, yeah, there, and this is an argument that's been made all the time. Why wouldn't we just be philosophical zombies? Like, on an
yeah,
evolutionary level.
that is a very effective argument. Like why do we need it? Why can't we just like why do we need if the internal subjective experience didn't help us evolve, didn't help us survive, why would we need it? And now the counter argument to that is that what the materialists will say is just that it's necessary. Like it's part of the engine. Like the
No,
same
that
thing
you
is
can't
the result of the
really
engine.
say
The
that
same
from
way that the consciousness is the result of the
That
complex.
philosophical zombies can't exist, basically.
you can yeah, you can't say that as a materialist that it's needed, because if it can't exist, that it's needed doesn't help.
It's saying that a philosophical zombie can exist. That if you have the complexity of a human brain, you automatically have consciousness. It's entailed in consciousness, even though the consciousness doesn't have a causal role. It's just entailed in the complexity of the being.
Mm. Now, of course, you could just say, like, and I think one of our commenters here stated, yeah, no level of physical complexity can even explain the basic stuff of like subjectivity, and that may actually, like, you could just, I guess you could just ask someone like, why would that be the case? Why would subjective experience happen because of the complexity? Like,
Yeah, and complexity is such a
yeah.
I know it
big.
is very like it is a very weird idea. It's like you could have like a medium complex circuit, like, or even like a computer circuit with all these bits and pieces, and they all go along, and all the circuits come into play, and you don't get consciousness. The computer doesn't become alive and start thinking and feeling. And you increase the complexity, you still don't have consciousness. You increase the complexity even more, and now you suddenly have consciousness. Now all of a sudden, because you added enough neurons to the circuit, you added enough pieces to the puzzle, consciousness just emerges. Like consciousness just once the consciousness meter reaches 10,000, you get thinking and feeling and vivid life.
Yeah,
Before the complex meter is at 10,000, it's just a rock.
and Dabby,
It's kind of
what do you think of that from a scientific standpoint? Isn't that an ugly view of the universe with a totally arbitrary limit like that? That
what's kind of it's kind of a very like kind of like
it's not
cold.
very elegant.
I know it's like so all of a sudden the universe is kind of this kind of jumps to thinking and feeling once complexity reaches that level. That's what they'll say. They'll say that consciousness, just like a rock has certain aspects, like it's red and has a certain mass and something. Once a system reaches enough complexity, it gains the feature or the attribute of consciousness.
Yeah, but there's some people that are like physicalists that say that it's an actual thing, but it's arises, it's emergent, or it's an aspect of the physical. But like they acknowledge the mental as a thing, even though it's kind of totally dependent on the physical.
Right, but these people believe that if consciousness is totally dependent on the physical, and it can't go back and affect the physical, right?
Uh, no, it's like that it becomes a problem because it seems like consciousness is this complex thing that arises from these processes underlying it that doesn't have this kind of coherency to it as the conscious field does, or your conscious experience. Because that's kind of a whole experience. Yeah, the totality of all your kind of perceptions and thoughts in the moment. It's hard to see how that can work its way back down. Like if it rises that, where can it like put its like causal role or its causality back down into the brain and affect behavior?
And I was actually just thinking about this earlier because, like the four of us in this group, we've been talking about consciousness on Skype last few days, and like I've just been thinking about like if you have consciousness, you have how does the consciousness affect the brain configuration? Because if the brain configuration is some way, and if being in a sad state is going to somehow affect the system, affect the material that gets you out of the state, how does it do that? Because it can't do that through physical laws. You know what I mean? Like it's so weird.
Yeah.
Like the only way it would have to be like some kind of immaterial, non-physical laws that would allow the kind of brain state, the kind of not the brain state, the kind of the consciousness state to affect the brain configuration.
Oh, yeah, but some people would just call consciousness physical. Like, even though it's mental, it's part of the physical in the sense that it's part of the the causal network that is the physical.
No, but I mean you could have a brain configuration, but the brain configuration being sad won't change the brain configuration. It's not a force. Sadness isn't
Yeah. Okay. I get where you're coming from.
Because I think some people they don't know much about physics, so they can't see that for every time the brain configuration changes, there has to be like a force driving that change, a physical force, usually from electricity, like a voltage difference. That
Maybe a
causes
chemical difference. Probably.
Well, actually, this was what I was trying to tell earlier. That this is only problem. Like if you have a system that becomes kind of creates a complex whole. Like if there's a way to like non-computational way to solve things, for example, and this would be an explanation of consciousness not being computational, that is not working with ones and zeros, and like a Turing machine or a regular computer. That consciousness is a thing that is possible in the universe, and it's only when you try to kind of reduce it to this, put it into these kind of parts or material parts that are independent of each other, that it becomes a problem. But if you have like an interlocked system where quantum mechanics would kind of point to this being a thing that can happen. You can have a system where all particles create a new system.
I don't know. That's kind of like where I was going at, because like the way I see it, like if you could have like a kind of superposition of states and be able to just have like consciousness. This is totally speculative. There's no science here. Don't take me as an authority here, but it's just like a kind of thought experiment I had. But basically, if you could like manipulate the superposition of states where the state could be in a superposition, but the consciousness kind of forces it or kind of preferentially selects it out of the superposition into a state where it's kind of preferable in terms of consciousness. Like it just seems like maybe there's like a quantum physical way where consciousness works to affect the physical state.
Yeah, or you can just see it like this. It just like creates this small structure, and within this there's like a superposition of states. Or there's no like states of every one particle. It's just one system. So there you can have consciousness interacting there. You can say that when something goes into there, it goes into consciousness. And what you don't see, you can't see consciousness, and you can't you can't see the non-connectedness of this whole, but you would see like effects that can. Oh God, it's
Sorry about that.
I guess Roger Penrose's explanation is best that that we can. I think he proves that we can understand things that a computer can't.
Oh, we were talking about the. Are you talking about that one with the being able to discover new mathematical, not proofs?
Proofs, yeah. Computer you can you can have any number of rules and stuff and variables programmed into it, but it can't come up with a new proof that you can't get from the rule, that you can't get computationally from the rules.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but the thing is that when we have a complex enough formal system, we can make a statement that makes sense in this system, and we can see that it is true. But the computer could never see it because you can't use the rules to prove it. This might sound weird, but that's probably because you're unused to thinking like this. Because there's no reason the universe should only work mechanically or computationally.
Quick question: what do you think of the Turing test?
I don't think it's substantive. I've never really thought it was. It just didn't.
I don't think like you could make a computer that could trick a person into thinking he's a real person, but that could just be a super complex code where you just have so many commands and just so much complexity where it's just a manipulation. You're just manipulating the person into thinking that the person on the other end is a real person and not just a computer program. But it doesn't mean that the Turing machine has any inner subjectivity, that it really feels and thinks and wishes and hopes and that's the real stuff of consciousness. It's not being able to trick somebody into thinking you're a person when you're just a computer program.
Yeah,
So,
I think that hinges on that whole complexity argument. That if you get it complex enough, that it would act like a human. It just is.
Well, that's the philosophical zombie, but then there's the philosophical zombie objection.
Yeah, but then you could just say the philosophical zombies are impossible.
yeah, exactly. It's like I think that you would kind of be able to find out that this isn't a conscious being. It might be a bit not that easy. It might fool you a bit, but I think that you would be able after a while, because it doesn't have a consciousness that affects the output, I don't think you can simulate that only with computer code.
My own, yeah, I am. All right, I was to make sure I wasn't muted. What do you guys think about? All right, for this podcast, I mean, have you guys gone over everything you wanted to go over in terms of consciousness?
Oh, I think there's. Do you have anything you want to bring up?
Not really. I mean, I feel like our conversations were much more interesting on Skype, but since we've already went over it, basically, it kind of becomes much. We kind of all have certain things that have kind of been agreed upon and things like that. So before there's more arguing, and now it's just kind of like.
Oh, I think there's one thing I wanted to bring up, and I think we could just bring it up in this conversation and see where it leads.
Yeah.
So I was talking to my mom about this, and she's very intelligent, and she was telling me about her views on free will and consciousness, and she said that she subscribes to a theory by Viktor Frankl, who was a Austrian-Hungarian psychiatrist and neurologist who proposed logospherity, and what he said was.
I've never heard that.
Well, basically what he said was if you have a person and between the action, in the space between the action and the reaction is free will. So if you tell somebody to do something and then they do it, step one is the action is you telling them to do something, and what they do is the reaction, that kind of pause, that kind of gap, that pause button, that space is where consciousness is, and where they have the ability, to make their own decisions. Now, like something like a
So,
dog, like
so
you tell a dog to sit down, it's either going to sit down or it's going to refuse to sit down. But there's no consciousness there. There's no like pause button. It doesn't have that kind of capacity.
you don't think dogs are conscious?
You think that only humans have consciousness?
It may have consciousness to some degree, but let's just assume here that it doesn't. Like at least that is, or even if you want to say like a robot. Like if you just you turn the robot on, like we could all agree a robot doesn't have consciousness. You turn the robot on and you tell it to say its little voice command. You press the button, it'll say its voice command, and either it'll do it or maybe there's like an electrical malfunction and it won't be able to do it. But there's no pause or there's no space between the action and the reaction. So you think is that when I say that kind of space between the action and reaction is consciousness and free will? Would you agree with that?
No, not really, because I don't think that free will is necessary for consciousness or vice versa.
I think that might be part of it. I don't think you have free will all the time though, like the ability to influence stuff like that, because you just don't kind of think about it sometimes.
Well, I think I think it kind of leads like to an open idea. I was actually curious what you would think. Do you think that everybody has the same amount of free will, or does free will vary among people? Like, do some people have more of a capacity to kind of exert their own consciousness and influence onto their behavior than others? And there's the level to which you could kind of pause and take that break and think about what you're doing and kind of making sure you're doing what you want to do. You're doing what you will yourself to do instead of just reacting. Does that determine the amount of free will you have, or does everybody basically have the same amount of free will?
Yeah, I've actually thought about this because when it comes to animals, it's hard. They have consciousness, so they should have free will too, in a way. But I think that to it, like the mechanism that is free will, if you have to have kind of a complex enough self-consciousness to like have like a model of yourself in your consciousness and kind of direct it with your consciousness. So I don't think I think the mechanism is there in every conscious being, but different humans can be at different levels, and you can probably evolve it to a level that you get more and more control over which direction.
Or you can just like kind of like imagine, some poor black person from Detroit, and like that kind of stereotype of a person who's very impulsive, never really thinks about what he's doing, never really takes that pause break. Whenever somebody does something in the slightest way to piss them off, he'll just kind of go out and start screaming and going crazy, or who'll just always do his first impulse, or just always do the first thing that comes to his mind without ever like taking a pause and contemplating. Like I feel like that person seems like it's a much less like satisfying life because you're not really like taking that break and exerting your own.
I don't think that archetype is like an accurate depiction of the people who act in that, like seem to act like that. Like people who are incredibly impulsive, I think, are still able to more or less contemplate their actions. They just
do they contemplate their actions?
What I mean is like they still think like, oh, I'm angry, and so I'm going to do that. It's not like it's just like not like an instant reaction. It's like I'm angry, so I'm going to react like this.
Well, if you look at it from a mechanical perspective, it's just.
No. Yeah, can I just say this might sound larpy or something, but I actually mean it totally non-ironically. I think only God can judge these things because, you have to have total information about the person. His the context he exists in, the possibilities that are there, and we don't know these things. We can only try to use our free will to kind of use our will to direct ourselves in a good direction.
I think what Monad kind of going on, elaborating what Monad said. Like, you know, that person who gets, well, let's say, you know, there's some kind of stimulus, and he just gets really angry and starts charging. He just starts getting super angry. He might be conscious. He might be conscious of what he's doing. He might still have that subjective understanding of what he's doing, but he's not. He's not.
Couldn't you say that all free will is sort of illusory? Like some people would say that, like,
Hold on,
oh,
we
you
can go
know,
on
it's
to that. I just want to finish this thought real quick. Like, even though, you know, he's conscious of what he's doing, he's not exerting. At least he's not. He doesn't seem to be
He's
exerting
not
will
exert.
on his
Yeah.
behavior. He doesn't seem to be taking that break, taking that
He,
pause
he,
and kind of forcing himself to do what he thinks is the right thing to do, and not just doing what naturally comes in the most impulsive, base way.
yeah, I think like a person like that probably has choices. You don't know how kind of wide range he has, though, like how hard a certain thing is to do or not to do for another person, because that probably depends.
Yeah, with me, I just think that, like, honestly, and I've said this to you guys before, I don't actually think that. I'm not sure if I think free will is a thing. Like, I would like it to be a thing, but I don't. I think that for the most part, I mean, in both of my kind of possible ways the mind works, they're both basically like the brain inputs material, you know, has material inputs and outputs, and the
And it just kind of
consciousness
goes
is just
through.
kind of a part of
It
that.
kind of
It can
goes
be
through an
affected.
immaterial. Like, I can kind of see that too, where you have the material input, like the kind of, let's say you eat something, you take a bite of something. Yeah, that's the material input, and then it kind of goes up. It goes up to the electrical configuration, and then there's some kind of relationship with the consciousness, and the consciousness. Now you're happy, and the consciousness goes back down and influences your behavior, but you never had any will in the matter.
And also that I think that, like, I think it's more the mind affects the consciousness than the other way around. Like the brain,
Wait,
not the mind,
what do you mean by
Don't
mind?
say the mind to the brain.
like the brain affects the consciousness. So the brain has the stimuli, the configuration for happy, or the stimuli for happy, and then that affects the consciousness, and so you feel happy. As opposed, and like
It only means
the
happy.
brain says, "Oh, I want like." Wouldn't that, then we can get into like the really weird stuff, like affecting random number generators in your mind or something. The brain says, "Oh, do that consciousness," and the consciousness just does what the brain tells it to do because they're like, you know, interconnected, basically. Like basically, the consciousness is acts like the. This is probably like really heretical to like traditionalism, but the brain, the material brain, is the thing that acts on the immaterial conscious. Uh, so you know, you get hit, the brain says pain, the consciousness feels pain, and then the consciousness doesn't really influence like how the brain acts, basically.
So what's the point of the consciousness? Why do
Yeah,
you?
What do you mean? What's the point? It just because it's part of reality.
Oh, so you're saying it's the result of complexity?
No, no.
and
Well, like I said, like I was talking about before, with the like consciousness is everywhere. It's a big thing, a pool.
yeah,
But
yeah,
it probably would allow the brain to comprehend things a little better. I'm not sure because I have my religious connotations. I think that the consciousness is kind of like has a religious connotation, and it has a kind of like consciousness is what actually exists, and the physical is just like within that. It's really
So you're just saying the consciousness is a higher level of the physical?
kind of.
I would probably agree with you here, not like in all the details, but consciousness is more fundamental.
Yeah, exactly. The consciousness is more like consciousness begets everything else.
That's why you shouldn't be surprised that like you don't have two questions, like how come there's a world and how comes there are beings in the world, because being is consciousness.
Yeah, like that.
Like, but I think consciousness might have to have some kind of embodiment, kind of locating itself onto other things to be able to interact with other people and stuff. So
Yeah. Let me see. Yeah. So I guess that we can kind of end here. I assume.
There's like some kind of like concluding thoughts or
Yeah,
words.
yeah. I'll go over that. I just want to tell the people watching the stream, all two of you, that this is like I feel like maybe this wasn't a good stream for my channel because I'm like the most shitposty person. So I feel like this is kind of a serious thing.
We should have added a new subject also.
Yeah, I guess there.
I thought it went well. I thought we had some good
No, I
discussion.
think we did, but I'm just saying like I feel like now people are gonna expect me to make like deep philosophical videos as opposed to talk about like just shit post.
Well, I have one quick thing to raise before we finish, if that's all right.
Go
Sorry,
ahead.
go on.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to quickly mention the concept of what we were saying earlier, sort of the concept of free will. Do you think, is there such thing as true free will, and is true free will the main defining factor of consciousness? Because I actually wouldn't say that it necessarily is.
Like, I almost feel like consciousness, free will would come last. Like first, if consciousness is just physical,
Wait. Yeah, there you go. Now go.
If consciousness is just physical, it's just a brain configuration, then there's no way you'd have free will. It'll just be physical laws. There's no choice in the system. There's nothing the ego can do to have a causal role in the system. And then let's say consciousness is immaterial, and there's just some kind of way of integrating the material brain and the immaterial consciousness. Now this opens the door to free will, but it's still possible that there never was any free will. What just happens is you have pain, it goes up to the consciousness level, and then it goes back down. The consciousness level tells the brain configuration to change, and that's what. But there's no choice being made. If the stimulus, let's say you have a taste you really don't like, the consciousness goes up and tells you that you don't like it, and you spit it out or something. Or let's say something you really like, the consciousness goes up and affects the brain state, and it changes it in such a way to promote the brain state or something like that. That would be somehow like some kind of inhibition and promotion of different brain states as a result of consciousness. Now, there's no free will there. But then the third possibility is consciousness is immaterial, and we have free will. And I think that's kind of what I was saying. Like when you're kind of in a kind of state where kind of in between, like an action and reaction, where you're just kind of contemplating and you're kind of forcing your will, then you could actually, through your own ego, for your own consciousness, you can change your brain states, change those brain configurations in like an almost like non-physical way, such that you can directly influence your behavior and choose and make your own choices. So you're actually using your ego to maybe not hit somebody who pissed you off, and that's not just determined. It's actually your ego doing that. If it was just like determined,
No, don't say ego. Stick to consciousness.
it's just your consciousness doing that. And I think that would be my theory. Like I don't necessarily, like, I'm undecided. I say I'm agnostic on the matter. I think determinism leads to less contradictions, and it leads to like a kind of easier to grasp worldview. Because if you had total free will, how do you explain like all these, like, how do you explain like psychopaths who like or people who have bad genetics who end up being murderers and everything? Are they just bad people? Or they just have bad consciousness? They just don't have enough will. But if you have determinism, and then it just shows, then you don't really have to worry about any of that. It just basically means you either had the right genes, environment, and like conditioning to be a good person, the right opportunities to be a good person, or you didn't. It wasn't because of your consciousness, the strength of your will. So I think that's all I wanted to say there.
Yeah, I would like to address first the idea, like the primary function or what defines consciousness is the experience thing. That's kind of how you point to the phenomena. Living beings having inner experiences and stuff like that. But I think connected to this is this free will. There's two sides of the same coin. The free will is the agency side, and there's the subjective side. But you don't have to be able to influence exactly what person you become or something, as long as there's some kind of influence that isn't determined by anything but you yourself. Only you yourself are the one that kind of makes the input. Then there's free will. And
well, I was just gonna say, with my belief, I would agree with Dubby on it, that free will is the last thing on there. Free will is definitely not necessary for consciousness. But you guys want to wrap up maybe and say some final statements, or whatever, or you guys want to?
Let's just
sure.
End on quick, short final statements. Iberian, you want to start?
Well, it was really good podcast, I guess. Had a maximum of 7 viewers at a time, which is pretty good for a channel with only 90 subs, and it being the time and day. But yeah, overall, I'd say this was a good podcast, and it was very interesting talking about consciousness and how it manifests and all of that. Sorry about that. And then everyone else go ahead.
I guess I'll just say that we could there are plenty of things we could talk about on the alt-right. We could talk about demographics and the Jewish question and Trump and wars and all that. But something like consciousness, it's just a refreshing topic because on one hand it's just so fundamental. It's obviously you can't have nationalism or any political ideology unless you first have the ability to have consciousness. And on the second hand, it's so mysterious, this kind of idea that consciousness, nobody completely understands consciousness. You might find some crazy guy on the street will tell you that he knows everything about consciousness, but he's wrong. So I think it's definitely a very interesting topic to explore. And as we get to these kind of topics of materialism and immaterialism and eliminative materialism and what does consciousness mean? What does it mean to be a conscious being? Can robots be conscious? Can computers be conscious? What are philosophical zombies? And lastly, what does consciousness say about free will? We could have very interesting conversations, and there's obviously a lot to learn. There's a lot for me to learn. For me to really understand these topics, I won't be able to fully understand it, but for me, to really be able to even just discuss it on a level I'd like to, I probably have to read several books on the topic.
Also, real fast, implying that this is an alt-right podcast. But anyway, next person.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Should I start? Yes. I think that what I find is that we grow up into this culture that we have these ideas that we kind of grow up with. Maybe even if you grow up religious, you probably grow up with with a materialistic worldview, with this kind of billiard ball universe. It's metaphysics based on the physics of Newton, and this limits people, I think, when they try to imagine how consciousness can interact with the world and try to attach it to a mechanical process, when there are such things as non-material processes that would kind of fit consciousness much better, provide a place for consciousness in the physical world, or for interacting with it, however you want to put it. So yeah. Ed?
Yeah, I largely agree with Monad. I think that one of the great sort of tragedies of our age is the constant assumption of. I feel like there's a good deal of sort of filling in the gaps with assumptions from how things are now, and we often forget that things like the world of quantum physics, let's say, was only recently understood and opened and kind of opened up by humanity, and
And we still
there are
have
probably
still haven't totally understood.
exactly, and there are probably far more processes that have yet to be documented and that are not fully understandable to us at this present moment. And I don't think, and in such instances, I don't think that it's perfectly fair to assume that to sort of assume.
Your
You
mic. Ed, your mic.
Alrighty, well,
That was good.
this is a good podcast.
Okay,
I'll see
turn it
you
off.
have these guys as podcast or channels in the description. So I'll see y'all. I'm out, nigga.